Good morning, guys. Bigfooter Gary, and you'll notice it's not midnight, and there aren't a million moths flying around. No mosquitoes. It's a beautiful sunny morning, and I just had the time, and I've been saving a couple smaller viewer accounts. Okay, so I've had people send me in the comments. One person left a story, and maybe we'll start with that story. Okay, because not all of you guys read the comments. And then I had another story emailed to me by another person who most of you guys will recognize the name. We see her on there all the time. And she shared her story, used her real name. Both of these people used their real name. Okay? And both of these people also actually contacted me after they initially sent in their stories and added more detail. John, in his story, he corrected one of the distances. Now, I didn't write it in this. This is the original account that he sent me. But just take note that he went back and he said, I talked to a friend and we talked about distances. And I think it was actually closer than what I mentioned in the original story. So that's important. And Teresa sent me a follow-up saying as well that when she finished out her camping trip, she used a light on her tent for the rest of the trip. Little details like that tell me absolutely these guys believe what they saw was an unknown cryptid, and these stories are real, and they're sending in information after the fact. So John Reiser's account. I came face to face with a real-life Bigfoot about 30 years ago in the afternoon. He was standing in the middle of a small swamp when I approached him from behind. He pushed a huge dead tree in the swamp over and was looking down at its roots. Why? I have no idea. We were only about 70 or 80 yards apart. The minute I got a clear view of him, I said, "Holy shit," in a low whispering voice to myself. The second I said that, he immediately turned around and stared at me. He was huge. I would guess he was about 9 feet tall. Brown hair about a foot long, tangled with splotchy bald spots up and down, and approximately 700 to 800 pounds. We stood looking at each other for a good 20 seconds, and I was completely frozen in shock and fear at what I was looking at. I always thought stories about Bigfoot were just a guy in a gorilla suit and all make-believe. But on that day, I found out the truth for sure. After 20 seconds, he turned and ran to the south of the swamp and into the woods. And I ran as fast and as hard as I could to the north, thinking he might be coming up around the swamp to get ahead of me and possibly kill me. I was never so scared in my life. I tripped and fell 2 times over my own feet because I was trying to run faster than my body wanted to go. I was also crying as I was running in fear, thinking he was probably coming up behind me. When I made it to my car about half a mile away, I was so out of breath I didn't even have the energy to open the door and get in. I just dropped to the ground, right by my driver's door, crying still. When I looked up and behind where I was running from, I realized he was not coming, and I started to catch my breath and calm down. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was on the verge of a heart attack, but luckily not. I drove away and was contemplating if I should call the cops and report it, but I also started to realize if I did that, all they would do is laugh and think I was some kind of nutcase, so I never did. The very next day, I was reading the paper, and I read that some lady was standing in her kitchen washing the dishes and looking out the window, when it must have been that same Bigfoot I saw, she said, walked across her backyard, and she reported it. Where she lived was only 10 miles south of the place I saw it, so that also was confirmation to me, that anyone who said I was crazy telling a story only would prove that she was crazy too. I never ever set foot in those woods again, not ever. This all happened in Ashtabula, Ohio, right along the shore of Lake Erie. My name is John Reiser. I'm on Facebook a lot, and I live in Butler, Indiana now. I'm no longer afraid or worried like I used to be of what others think of me, so I'm no longer afraid to tell it like it is. All I can say is, seeing is believing. And if I never would have seen it, I know I would still think it is a guy in a gorilla suit. That's my story, and it is what it is. John Reiser. So the second story is Teresa's account. Hi Gary, I want to preface my story by telling you that I live in southwest Pennsylvania in the Chestnut Ridge area right next to a mountain range called the Laurel Mountains. When I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of money, so our family went camping every year as a vacation. When you have 6 children, that's all you can really afford. I grew up loving camping and fishing, and when I had children of my own, we took them camping every year as well, and taught them the joys of fishing and just exploring the woods, picnicking, camping, etc. Now I am 65, and my children are both in their low 40s. My son still loves camping. My daughter, however, had not camped for a long time. So last year when I turned 64, my son and his wife now got me a tent set up for my birthday. They surprised me by inviting my daughter and husband to come up and camp a few nights in the camp ring for pets, next to our ring. My son and wife already had a favorite spot at a state park up near Somerset, Pennsylvania in the Laurel Ridges, where they camped all the time. That May, they went up and camped for 2 weeks straight, which was the limit you were allowed to stay without leaving the campgrounds for at least one night. They had a wonderful time and loved this spot because it was down and away from all the others and in the woods. You had to walk down a steep kind of rocky dirt trail to get to it. It was maybe 100 feet from the road, I'm guessing. They had a huge canopy set up on the left, and then on the right there was a path right next to the fire ring that led to where the tent was set up. Their tent was very large, probably enough to sleep at least 12 people. They had a huge blow-up mattress that stood at least 2 feet high, so they had a very comfortable bed. Their tent was kind of under the trees, and there it was almost as if you weren't in a state park, because you really couldn't see the other camp spots around you unless you really looked hard. Also, this spot is on a long downhill loop, and there is only one spot across the street which is very small, and there were no others for at least 100 to 200 feet up the road. They also went camping in June and stayed for another 2 weeks, as my son had his own business and could take the time off. She, his wife, was off for the summer because she worked at a college, and all the kids had gone home for the summer. I went up and visited them at the campground because it was only about an hour drive from me, and the second time I went up to visit, they had a tent set up for me about 50 feet behind the huge fire ring, and just to the right of the canopy, but back further. The spots before their camp weren't occupied when I arrived on a Monday. Most people had packed up Sunday and left. I was very surprised but happy. I still had a sleeping bag and a chair from the last tent setup I had bought. It was down in the basement and actually still had a camp lantern too. I had a blow-up mattress, but sadly it would not hold air. Anyway, they invited me up to come up to camp the second week. They were there for as long as I wanted to stay. My plan was just to stay for 3 nights, but I ended up staying 6 nights altogether. When they went up in June, they had a couple of experiences that kind of gave me pause about camping overnight there. One night when they were asleep around 3 in the morning, they were awakened by a very loud owl hooting on one side of the tent, very loudly. Louder than a normal owl, they said. And then again on the other side of the tent, another owl would answer. My son's wife said this went on for about 15 minutes, and then it finally stopped. Then a little bit later, she heard something coming up through the woods, and it lumbered past her tent. She said it sounded like it had asthma and a very guttural breathing, like it was struggling to breathe. I said, "Oh my God, that was a Bigfoot." They didn't believe in Bigfoot, and they just chuckled. Now you have to understand there have been many Bigfoot sightings in the entire area over the years, and there are videos on YouTube about it. Even in my own town, there were sightings back in the 1970s, and also UFOs that landed in a field. Also, not far from me is the famous Kecksburg UFO crash that was all over the news. So I'm definitely a believer in all of this and have been watching many channels on YouTube about Bigfoot and have become pretty educated on the subject. So you understand my apprehension at spending a night in this very wooded campsite in Bigfoot country. I want to explain also that behind my tent there were many little saplings that were freshly snapped off. I know because I went back there looking for wood for the fire and also to pee occasionally when I didn't feel like walking uphill 100 feet to the car and driving to the bathroom to go. Also back to the left of that area was a part of the woods that was super creepy with a downed huge tree. It looked like the rest of the woods. It seemed darker and creepier, and I don't think you could even have walked through it. It was so thick with trees that were down. I felt like it was not safe there. I never went near it while I was there. Down another 150 feet was the one road that went through the entire camp area of the state park. That is the only road in and out of the state park that I know of. There was very little traffic on that road at night. On the third night, I was in a nice deep sleep when suddenly at around 3:30 in the morning, I'm guessing a very loud whack on a tree woke me up. I sat up in my sleeping bag and was immediately filled with adrenaline and fear because it sounded so close to where my tent was, like right back in that area with all the downed trees. My entire body began to shake and shiver, and I was filled with more adrenaline than I ever remember having. I looked at the area around my tent where the windows had canvas that pulled out so you could have airflow, almost like a window, but you couldn't see anything. I was so afraid something was going to come and look in from those little screens. I laid there in fear for about 15 minutes, and another whack happened right above our campsite. Then about 10 to 15 minutes later, another one on down past my son's tent. I laid there in fear for at least half an hour before I could get back to sleep. In the morning when I got up, I asked my son and daughter-in-law if they had heard that loud crack, and they both said no. I was in complete shock that neither of them had. To this day, I'll never understand how they weren't awakened by the loud cracking sounds. The next day, a guy came in on a motorcycle and had a tent hammock. Those new hammocks that have a tent over the top. I really couldn't even see it because we were way down the road, and I saw it when I went to drive to the bathhouse. The next day, he walked to the top of the hill above our camp and asked if we knew of a bear around the night before. I did remember something during the night. A car stopped down the road, and I heard people talking about a bear. But that's all I heard. We told him that. He said around 3 a.m. something touched his foot in the tent hammock, and he wondered if it was a bear. That gave me the creeps again. He left that day, and no one else used that spot the whole time I was there. I neglected to say that the first day I was there, I was sitting at the fireplace, and 2 pine cones came down at my feet. Neither my son or daughter-in-law had that happen before then. I asked. It may just be a coincidence, though. Nothing else happened the rest of my trip. Thankfully, because I would have been afraid to ever camp again if it did. Anyway, this is 100% true and my experience with Bigfoot. Thanks to you, Gary, and I hope you enjoyed my story. Your friend, Teresa. So, like I say, guys, lots of people are having these accounts, and I agree with the last story that we read last week where the person sending it to me said, I remember all of the details very clearly, and I want to share it because it was my experience. And I just want to tell you guys, I'm not judging any stories that come to me. So, unfrequentedworld@gmail.com. Send me your accounts. No judgment here, guys. Give us as much detail as you can. We want to hear what happened to you guys, and I enjoy sharing it. And there is no judgment here, right? I appreciate, and I want to thank this week's storytellers, John and Teresa, for writing up their accounts. Thanks for sharing, guys, and I'll have more stories for you guys next week.